Good morning, Living Grace. It's good to be together, and whether you are a part of the Living Grace family or you're just joining us online this morning, we welcome you. It's good to be together for this time that we have. And as always, I want to encourage you to connect with us via our connection card. We have a connection card that's online, that's digital, and if you're watching from our website, it's directly below this video. If you're watching from Facebook or YouTube, we have posted a link to our connection card in the comments below, so be sure to connect with us via our connection card. Just reach out and say hi to us and let us know that you're watching. Today, we finish up our series called God's Calendar by looking at the celebration of the Sabbath day. Now, when I was a kid, I was taught to observe the Sabbath day. That observing the Sabbath day was very important. The Sabbath day was the Lord's day. This Lord's day was every Sunday. We were not supposed to do any work. And that was kind of a good thing when you were a kid. You know, we weren't supposed to work, and I really enjoyed the Sunday afternoon naps. But working was forbidden, and especially mowing. For some reason, I remember mowing the grass was a big deal, and we weren't supposed to mow the grass on Sundays. And so I'd see someone out mowing the grass on a Sunday, and I'd kind of question what was going on. Well, nowadays, I don't think there's anything wrong with mowing your grass on Sunday. In fact, I do it sometimes, and mowing is kind of relaxing for me. Now, there's a guy in my neighborhood, a guy who lives in my neighborhood who mows his grass, and, and I think this might be the key. He mows his grass in dress clothes. I mean, seriously, he always has dress pants on and a dress shirt, like a button-down dress shirt, and he's always soaked. And I wonder why he wears these dress clothes when he's mowing the grass. Well, maybe that's the key. Maybe that's what makes mowing the grass on Sunday acceptable. You have to dress the part. You have to dress like you're going to church. Anyway, there's all kinds of various views on whether or not we should observe the Sabbath day today. There are some who believe that the Sabbath day was just for the Jewish people, that now we have a new covenant through Jesus, that Jesus is now our Sabbath. He has fulfilled that, and so we don't have to observe the Sabbath day today. Still others believe that the Sabbath is still binding for Christians today, that it's still in effect, and we still should observe the Sabbath day. Some believe that the Sabbath should be observed on a Saturday because that was the original day of Sabbath, a Saturday. And some believe that that day has changed, that because Jesus rose on the first day of the week, that now our Sabbath is Sunday and we should celebrate on Sunday. And some people believe that it doesn't matter. You just choose one day a week, and as long as you have one day a week that is your Sabbath day, then that's fine, but you still should celebrate a Sabbath. So should we or shouldn't we? We're going to talk a little bit about that today. What's this Sabbath day celebration all about? And as I mentioned earlier, we are concluding our series, God's Calendar. This is actually week number 10, part 10, and we are concluding it today. We've been looking at the feast days from the book of Leviticus, and we've been learning that God gave the people of Israel these feast days to help them remember, kind of like a calendar that would help them remember their past and celebrate all that God had done for them. But this calendar also pointed the way to the future, pointed the way to Jesus, and helped them prepare for the coming Messiah. So I just would encourage you to go back and review. We keep all of these messages and all these services online on our website, livinggrace.church, if you want to go back and you want to catch up or you want to review what we've been learning in this series. Now, these feast days that we've looked at, these were yearly reminders. Yearly reminders. What we're talking about today, the Sabbath day was a weekly reminder, a weekly reminder. And it also was fulfilled by Jesus. So what's the Sabbath all about? What was the purpose of the Sabbath? And are we supposed to celebrate the Sabbath today? Let's read about it in Leviticus chapter 23, verses 1 through 3. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, 'These are my appointed festivals, the appointed festivals of the Lord, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies. There are 6 days when you may work, but the seventh day is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work wherever you live. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. So, as probably many of you know, observing the Sabbath day, celebrating, remembering the Sabbath day was one of the 10 Commandments. And we can read the 10 Commandments in the book of Exodus, chapter 20, and verse 8 specifically talks about the Sabbath day. It says this, Exodus 20, verse 8, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." So first of all, let's look at the word Sabbath. The word Sabbath means to stop, to cease. It doesn't mean to take a rest. The Sabbath rest is not about taking a nap because you're tired. It just means to stop, to cease. So whatever you were doing, take a break from it. Put it aside. Do something different. In fact, it says to make this day holy. Holy just means different. It means a day that's set apart. This one day should be different from the other 6 days. Now, I am really big on routine. Just ask my wife. Sometimes I really get stuck in a rut. Oftentimes, I get stuck in a rut, just doing the same things over and over and over again. And so that gets me into trouble sometimes, especially when I'm asked to do something different, something out of my routine. And then that becomes difficult for me because, for instance, I'll be driving home from work and I'm supposed to stop at the store, but that's out of my routine. So I drive and I make all the turns that I usually make on my way home from work, and I turn into my neighborhood and down my street and into my driveway and into my garage. And then I realized I forgot to stop at the store because that was something different, because I get stuck in a rut. Well, the Sabbath was a way for God's people to reset, to get out of their weekly routine, to get out of their weekly rut, and to do something different, to do something holy. Now, here's the really cool thing. The Sabbath day commandment that we just read took the Israelites back to creation, right? Took them back to God's example at creation. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but then he rested on the seventh day. So, by connecting the Sabbath day command to God's work at creation, it reminded the people of Israel, and it reminds us today, that there was and there is a bigger picture, a bigger purpose for work. Sometimes we have this mindset that work is a bad thing, that work is a curse, that work is a result of sin, and that's just not true. You see, Adam and Eve, they worked the Garden of Eden before sin entered the picture. God had a purpose for their work. It was part of creation. Work is a good thing. There is a bigger purpose for our work as people created in the image of the Creator. Our work is part of God's design. It's about partnering with God and his creative work. It's a way for us to continue God's creative work through our gifts, through our talents, through our abilities. It's a way for God to continue to create, to bring light into darkness through his people. We are partners with God on earth through our work. Our work is good, but sometimes we need a reset. We need a Sabbath to remind us of that. I don't know about you, but I can get in this routine. I can get in this rut of work, day in and day out, work and more work and more work, day in and day out, doing the same thing over and over again, week in and week out, and I forget why I'm actually working to begin with. We work not just to make money and to make a living, although that's part of it. We work not only to find fulfillment in life, although that's part of it. We work for God's glory. We work to point the way to our Creator. We work to bring light into the darkness. We work to bring light into our dark world, into our dark communities, into our dark neighborhoods. We work to bring light into our dark schools and our dark workplaces. God worked, so we work. And God ceased from his work, and so we do as well. We just need a weekly reset, and that snaps us out of our routine. It snaps us out of our rut. And then we can get back to our work, knowing that there is a greater purpose for our work. The Sabbath day was a way for the people of God to reset. The Sabbath day was also an opportunity to remind God's people. You see, Adam and Eve, I'm sure as they worked the ground, they grew some incredible things in the Garden of Eden through the work of their hands. But God was the one who created the ground. He was the one who created the soil. He was the one who caused the plants to be watered through the dew of the ground. He's the one who made the shade tree. He's the one who created the sun to shine. And Adam and Eve forgot all about that, and they choose their way of doing things over God's way. And it was the same for the Israelites. God made them into a great nation. He delivered them from Egypt. He led them through the wilderness to the promised land. He gave them a land, this bountiful land flowing with milk and honey. He caused their crops to grow year in and year out. And he blessed them and provided for them in so many ways. But then Israel, they forgot that God was their ultimate provider, and they began worshiping other gods. It's the same for us today. You know, we get so caught up in our work. We get so caught up in the work of our hands, with the work of our hands. We get caught up in our own kingdoms, working for promotion, working for the latest upgrades, for bigger and for better, and so on and so forth. We begin to trust in ourselves. We begin to trust in the work of our hands, and we think that it's up to us, when in reality it isn't. You see, God has provided everything you need. He's provided everything that you need physically and spiritually. He's given you the ability to do what you do. He's given you the health. He's given you the strength. He provides you with every opportunity. So the Sabbath day is a reminder that God is the creator of life. He holds the universe in place. He is the ultimate provider and sustainer of all things. So the Sabbath day provided the opportunity for God's people to reset by doing something different. It also gave them the opportunity to be reminded that God is the ultimate provider. And then finally, it was a way for God's people to refocus priorities, to focus on what matters most. So let's fast forward to the life of Jesus. You see, all these feast days point to Jesus. They find their fulfillment in Jesus. And so by the time of Jesus, the religious leaders, the religious authorities, they came up with very meticulous and very detailed regulations on what you should do, what you shouldn't do on the Sabbath day. They were very legalistic about it. They came up with their own definitions of work. What is work and what is not work? And here's a couple examples. So plowing the fields, that was work. That was prohibited on the Sabbath. But according to some Jewish rabbis, spitting on the ground was work. Because when you spit on the ground, that disturbs the soil, which in their eyes was a form of plowing the ground. I mean, how ridiculous is that? So people would violate the Sabbath commandment just by spitting on the ground. Here's another example found in Luke chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" What they were doing wasn't unlawful. They were hungry. And so they were just picking the grain and rubbing it in their hands to separate what was edible and then eating the kernels. But according to the Pharisees, this was violating the Sabbath because this was viewed as reaping, as reaping and threshing, which was forbidden. I mean, just rubbing the wheat in their hands was considered reaping and threshing. I mean, another ridiculous example. These were just man-made rules. You see, the Pharisees, they were so focused on the law, on the rule. They were focused on the Sabbath day, but they weren't focused on the purpose of the rule, the purpose of the law, the purpose of the Sabbath. So what was the purpose? Well, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 2, also tells us the same story of the disciples walking through the grain fields, picking the grain. But Mark records more of the words of Jesus when they were confronted by the Pharisees. Jesus said these words to the Pharisees: "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." And that is so important. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. You know, I used to think that the Sabbath was the Lord's day because keeping the Sabbath was somehow for God's sake. No, the Sabbath was made for people. The Sabbath was for the benefit of people. And here's one more example from the life of Jesus. Back to Luke chapter 6, verses 6 through 9. On another Sabbath, he, Jesus, went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and he said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" And of course, we know the answer to that question. It's so simple. Of course, you're supposed to do good on the Sabbath. That is obvious. But here's the point. If the Sabbath was truly made for mankind, for the benefit of people, then relationship is always the priority. Relationship is always the priority. And so there are two sides to this. You know, like the Pharisees, you know, we sometimes tend to get caught up in our rules, wrapped up in our legalistic tendencies to the detriment of people. You know, our rules, our laws, our do's and don'ts should never trump relationship. Jesus always prioritized relationship over rules. He always prioritized relationship over rules. And here's the other side of this. If the Sabbath was made for man, if Sabbath was truly for the benefit of human beings, then God gave us the Sabbath to help us refocus our priorities on a weekly basis. The Sabbath day was a way for us to have the opportunity to refocus our attention on what matters most, on relationships, on the people in our lives. You know, everyone is so busy nowadays. You ask people how they're doing, and you usually get this response: "I'm so busy. Everything's so busy." And I say that all the time myself. I'm so busy. We say that. But listen, we sometimes get so wrapped up in our work that our relationships suffer for it. What should matter most in our lives, what should be a priority for us, the people in our lives end up suffering for it. Do you really want to sacrifice your relationships in that way? I sure don't, and I don't think you do as well. But when we take the time for a Sabbath rest, to cease from our work, to set it aside, we are able to refocus our priorities on what matters most. And we make ourselves available to be used by God in the lives of others. So, back to my original question. Should we observe the Sabbath day? Well, like I said earlier, there's all kinds of debate over this, and I don't think we will come to a complete conclusion or agree on the answer to this. But I personally don't believe that we're bound to that commandment, to that law today. I believe that we don't have to follow that legalistically today. I believe that Jesus fulfilled the law. And I believe that the only law that is binding on us today as believers is the new law, the new law of love. To love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and to love others as yourself. This is the new law of love. However, Jesus said that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is for our benefit. And so I think it would be wise for us on a weekly basis to cease from our work. Put it aside so that we can reset, break from our routine, break from our rut, so that we can see that there is a bigger purpose for our work. To remind us that God is our ultimate provider and not ourselves. And to refocus our priorities on relationship and the people that matter most. Having a Sabbath rest, taking the time to reset, remind, and refocus gives us the space we need, gives us the margin we need to love God and love others.
So today we're actually going to enter into worship through a time that we call Lectio Divina. It's a practice developed by Saint Benedict, one of the church fathers. And Lectio Divina simply means divine reading. And this divine reading is composed of 4 parts, 4 rhythms that we will move through. And the first is reading. It's the reading part of the scripture. And we're going to do that, if you want to turn to your Bibles, in Matthew chapter 11. We're going to be in verses 28 to 30 of Matthew chapter 11. And so we're going to read that. That's the first piece of it. And we're going to let it sink in. And as we read it, I'll remind you of this as we go, but this first part as we read it, I want you to hear a word or a phrase that just stands out for you. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part is the meditation. And that part is really just about taking that word or that phrase that really stuck in your brain the first time we read it and to just meditate on it. What is God speaking to you through that phrase, through that word? Why is that the thing that stood out to you? That's the meditation. And then we move into the response piece. And it's the time where you just respond out of what's in your heart to that phrase or that word that stuck out to you. Some people say it out loud over and over and over. Some people say it in their head and they just reflect on it. And some just offer it up as a prayer. Maybe it's a conviction that God laid on your heart. Maybe it's a praise that God laid on your heart. Maybe it's a situation that you need guidance for, that God brought to mind as you meditated and heard those words. So that's the response time. Then the final piece is the contemplation piece. It's that time of Sabbath or that time of rest in what God's laid on our heart through this time. It's the time that God's spoken, we've responded, and now we're resting in His presence. And this is in Marjorie Thompson's book, Soul Feast, that I have right here. I would recommend to any of you looking into spiritual disciplines. It's a very well written and easy to understand book about spiritual disciplines, but she describes it as a bit of a dance. It's not meant to be practiced in a linear fashion, step 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to practice it that way today as a corporate body, but this is a dance that maybe we just move freely in and out of these different patterns and these different rhythms until we're in a place where we can rest in what God has spoken to us and how we've responded. So we're going to do that now. We're going to enter into this time of Lectio Divina in Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30. Let me read it to you. This is our first part, the divine reading. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I'll put these words on the screen, and I want you just to read them again for yourself. And maybe there's a word, maybe there's a phrase, maybe there's a theme or a pattern in there that stands out to you. I'll give you just a few seconds to reflect and to read again. Now, as we move into the second step of this dance of Lectio Divina, we're going to just meditate. What is that word or that phrase that God put on your heart? Maybe there's nothing yet, so continue to read and reflect. But if there is something, spend about 60 seconds. I'll put the words again on the screen. Spend about 60 seconds just meditating on why that word or that phrase or that theme stuck out to you. Let God speak to you through it. And now we move into the third part of the dance, which is our response. Based on what God has laid on your heart or what you're thinking about now through these verses that we just read together, and you've spent some time meditating, how is God asking you to respond? Maybe it's a simple prayer. Maybe it's a confession. Maybe he's just asking you to stop what you're doing and rest in his presence. Maybe Sabbath is the thing that he's asking of you right now. So spend about 30 seconds in response to what God's laid on your heart through these words. And now, as we bring this time of Lectio Divina to a close, it's a time of contemplation. We've read, God has spoken through your time of meditation, hopefully, and maybe you've had a chance to respond. And now this contemplation is really just a time to rest, to know that God has spoken to you and you've spoken in response back to him. And you can just be one together in his presence. This time of contemplation could last through the end of the service. This time of contemplation could last for the rest of the day today, as God continues to just be in your presence and invite you into his. So we're going to close now let you enter into your time of contemplation. Jason is going to come back up and give us some discussion questions, some questions of reflection about the message, about this biblical concept of Sabbath and what it means for us today as believers. He's going to give us some very special announcements here to wrap up our service. But as the service closes, I just encourage you to rest in God's presence, to Sabbath today, and to continue to contemplate what He's just spoken to you through this time of Lectio Divina.
Well, thanks for joining us this morning, and I want to encourage you to continue wrestling with what you learned this morning. Have conversations throughout this coming week with your spouse, with a family member, with a friend. Have these conversations with your community group. What have you learned, and how will you apply what you learned about the Sabbath day? Now, here are some specific application questions for you to wrestle with. Do you need a reset in your life? Do you need this reset to snap you out of your rut, to snap you out of your routine, to see that your life, to see that your work is more than just routine, to see that your work is, that there's a bigger purpose, a bigger picture for your work? Do you need to remind yourself on a weekly basis that you are not your ultimate provider, but that God is? Do you need to refocus your priorities on what matters most, on people, on relationships? If you're busy, if you're overwhelmed with your work, with your schedule, what steps will you take this week to make the Sabbath a reality in your life? These are just some of the questions that I'd love for you to wrestle with this week. And as always, I will send those out via email. Now, there's also some things happening in the life of our church coming up this week that we'd love for you to be a part of. We've got some online community groups. We'd love for you to join us for those. We have Takeout Tuesday at the church on Tuesday night. We'd love for you to join us for that. And if you want to know more about some of these opportunities, or if you want to receive these application questions, the best way for us to communicate to you is through email. So through our connection card, give us your email address if you're not already receiving these emails, and we will add your email address to our communications list, and you'll be receiving emails on what's happening in the life of our church in the coming days and the coming weeks. Now, next Sunday is June 7th, and that's the date that we set to return to our church building, and we're going to do that. We're going to return to our church building next Sunday morning, June 7th at 10 o'clock. However, we still want to encourage you, if you are uncomfortable showing up in person, it's okay to stay at home. If you are 65 and older and you're not ready to get out and about, we encourage you to stay at home as well. If you have underlying health conditions, please stay at home. There's really no rush to get to our church building. However, if you are comfortable and you are not in one of those categories, feel free to come out. But we need to let you know that things are going to be different. Whether or not you are here in our building or you are meeting online with us, things will be different. And so look forward to an email coming out this week to explain what's happening with our services, our service coming up on June 7th, next Sunday. We'll give you instructions so that you know what to expect. Because if you come to our building and you're here in person, things are going to look different. We're going to need to be socially distant and spreading chairs out and some other things that will make the service different. And if you're watching online, things will be different for you as well, because we have to do these things simultaneously. We have to do an in-person service at the same time as we provide it for you online at 10 o'clock. So we'll be communicating everything that you need to know about our service next Sunday, June 7th. So be looking forward to an email. Once again, thanks for joining us this morning, and we will see you back next week, whether that be in person or online. We will be here. Have an awesome week.